Good morning, everyone. My name's James Hunt. I'm the chair of IoD Oxfordshire. Nikki Holt, Sofie Enterprises, is my co-host this morning. Sofie Enterprises is a new not-for-profit organisation recently formed. Its object is to help business owners and those who help business owners in Oxfordshire with the current challenges we're all facing. So let me just get the slides up. So this is week 6 of lockdown, and it's week 4 of the IoD weekly webinar series brought to you by the IoD and Sofie. Last week it was financial forecasting and cash management. And this is the order of play today. So we're discussing building trust and effective communication in a COVID-stricken world. Our panelists this morning are Amanda MacAuley, Carl Tomlinson and Vee Bharakda, and they're going to be sharing with you their nuggets of advice on what you should be doing regarding building trust and effective communication in the difficult climate in which we find ourselves. I will be interviewing the 3 panelists. At 10:25 we'll have the breakout sessions. So each of you as groups will be divided up. You've got to come up with your burning issue and appoint your spokesman. Nikki will talk more about that later. The chat lines will be open at 10:43 for questions from the floor. Spokespersons for each group should then put their burning issue to the panel. So we've got 3 great panelists with us this morning. What I'd like to ask everyone to do now is please turn off your video, which will have the effect of just leaving our panelists up on the top stage here. So if everyone could just turn off their videos, that'd be lovely. Lovely, Claire, if you could do that.
Yeah, brilliant. Lovely.
Excellent. So, where's Amanda gone? There's Amanda.
She's on a different page.
On the top row. Right. Trust, such an important thing. I was looking up before we came on today. Trust means you rely on someone else to do the right thing. You believe in that person's integrity and their strength. Trust, as we all know, is essential to an effective team because it brings a sense of safety. So first up, we have Amanda MacAuley. Amanda has her own consultancy business. Now, her LinkedIn profile is beautifully succinct, as you would expect from a great communicator. Amanda says, I help technical experts become compelling communicators and enablers of change. Now, over the last 5 weeks, it's been my great pleasure to get to know Amanda on a very important and challenging project, and her advice has been absolutely first rate. And so, Amanda, you know the format. We're going to ask you to let us all have your golden nuggets. Now, just before we do, we're playing a new game. The game is, who would you invite to supper if you only had 2 people to invite? Now, I went first and said I would invite Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler. Strange combination, you might think. Amanda came up with Stephen Covey and Peter Kay. I'm sure she'll be telling us a little bit about that later on. But Amanda, over to you. What are your 2 golden nuggets for us this morning?
Thank you very much, James. Well, they actually, both of them kind of are summed up in one particular phrase that I like a lot, which is that communication is an event in other people's minds. Communication is an event in other people's minds. And that one sentence kind of brings out the 2 things I thought would be useful just to share today. And the first one is really thinking about the fact that it's about other people. So whenever we communicate, any of us, it's really about what are we trying to get the other person to understand. Whereas very typically, we always approach it with thinking about what do I want to say, what do I want to do? And that sort of switch, it sounds very simple, but most people don't do it that way around. That switch think about the other side makes a huge difference as to how effective your communication can be, especially in this kind of in this world that we're all facing now. And what's fascinating is we've got so many examples day to day of where you can see this working and not working. So a classic one at the moment is President Trump, for example. Now, I know he's an extreme case, But if you, about a week ago, he did one of his normal press briefings, and he spent most of the time when he's up there about to tell the nation how the nation is coping with the crisis. He showed various video clips of other people congratulating him and his government team on how well they were handling things. Now, that's a classic example of someone giving a message they want to give, but not actually thinking about the other person and what message the other person wants to receive. James, I don't know if it's possible to get the slide.
The slides, I will put them on straight away. Let's go for that.
Now, I'm not saying in that example there of the Trump piece, that, there we go, yes. So I'm looking at the other people's rights. Why is there fish? So you've got a leader person, whatever role that is, team leader or CIO or CEO, and people you're trying to communicate with. In Trump's case, taking that one as just a real life example, his message was about, look how good we're doing this, absolutely landed with lots of people. All his current supporters will have taken that and said, isn't he doing a great job? I'm definitely going to vote for him again in November. He's doing such a great job. And look at all these video clips you've got about other people saying what a great job he's doing. But what that particular style of communication hasn't done is taken all the other people into account who perhaps don't think he's doing such a great job. So he has reinforced his supporting base, but he's actually not addressed at all anybody who might be of a different perspective and have a different angle on it. So the detractors got nothing. So what does that mean you can actually do? Well, it's just a really kind of useful example that whenever you're trying to communicate, first of all, think, who are the people you're communicating to? So with the little fish example there, you've got 2, 4, 6, 8 other goldfish looking to hear. Where are they coming from? First of all, who are those 8 people that you need to get your message across to? And by who? It can be as simple as actually getting a list of names, or there might be groups of people, there might be individuals on your context. And practically write their names down. Think about who they are, where they're coming from. And also, what sort of concerns they specifically have in their minds at the moment. Because your ability to really get communication across to them will be driven by how it relates to their world and their view of things. You can also ask some practical questions like, how do they want to be communicated with? Is it a face-to-face phone call, in this context, obviously through Zoom or phone calls or whatever. But the piece is not starting with, what do I need to tell you? It's more about, who am I speaking to? And that you start from that key point. And as I was thinking about this, another good example, actually, in a different way, is so Narendra Modi in India. So what did he do when everything started to go wrong? So he announced a lockdown. Absolutely, the right thing to do for all the right reasons. And he gave a 4-hour notice for that to happen. So for anybody who's in a place where 4 hours is plenty of time to sort yourself out and get into the right safe place, no problem. But had he thought about all the migrant workers, for example? Did he think through, well, what will happen if I give someone a 4-hour deadline? What are they likely to do? Are they likely to do what I want them to do, which is go home to a safe place and isolate? Or are they likely to panic, go by their thousands to bus stations and train stations and mingle in enormous crowds, trying to get back to their villages where, which is the sensible and the normal place you would expect them to go. So that was a really interesting impact that he had by perhaps not thinking through about who is he actually talking to and how can he be putting into his communication the right kind of information that those people need to have to be able to manage their circumstance and situation and adopt, the safe working practice, stop working, etc. The message he was trying to get across. So that whole first piece there about who is it you're talking to, it's about them, not about you. Practically start making that list, who is it you're talking to, and then build more detail around what they need before you then go and start communicating out. But if we go back, so why is there a shopping basket on that slide? And that comes on to the second part, really, the second nugget, which is about when you communicate, it's an event. Okay, what you're trying to, you're not saying something for just saying it for saying sake. You're trying to make something happen. So you want the person who's listening to what you're saying to do something, or to stop doing something, whatever. So an interesting example we've all lived through is, the stockpiling. So a message went out that we're probably going to go lockdown. So did we all want people to go out and suddenly buy 20 toilet roll? No, we didn't. But that's what happened. People took action based on the information that they received. And the key nugget here really is that because it's an event, you're trying to get people to do something, and they will do something if they really trust what you're saying. They will do what you want them to, you're guiding them to do, if you've got that trust there in that relationship with them. And that, coming back to this whole theme that we're talking about here, is particularly in times of crisis, you want people to feel they trust what you're saying, and therefore they will be guided by what they should or shouldn't do. So they'll stop buying all the toilet rolls that they don't possibly need, because they trust what you're saying about the supply chain circumstances, the availability, etc., etc. And that trust piece comes out particularly well, and there's lots of articles and things people can look at around this, where you bring into how you communicate a sense of empathy, and also you allow a two-way communication, which enables transparency. And as an example of what does that look like in real life, this empathy, how people have done it very well, there's some really interesting examples. So if you look at New Zealand, and Jacinta Ardern over there, she's known to put a lot of empathy in how she says what she needs to say. And of course, if you look at their experience, they're doing very well relative to, albeit a small population, but they've done extremely well in keeping their rates very, very low. And a great example very recently on how she does that is that she did a press conference, and it was just before Easter. And as part of that press conference, which was her normal update on, what cases were happening and lockdown procedures in place, etc., she also mentioned at the end that luckily both the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny had been classified by the government as key workers. So she addressed, the population as a whole, saying that, they will be out and about, they are able to, but made a comment that, perhaps they might not get to all houses this time around because it is quite tricky with all the lockdown conditions. Now, what she was doing was she was appealing, obviously, not just to children, how many children watch a Prime Minister's briefing, but she was also appealing to the parents of those children and getting them to, giving them something helpful that they can say to their children, which is, specific to that particular audience's need. So she massively increased her empathy with her audience, which means that the parents are all much more open to listening to the advice and doing what was being asked of them. Namely,
Amanda, that's great. We're just over the 5 minutes, so if I could just say thank you very much, Amanda MacAuley. That was absolutely fascinating. Now my pleasure to introduce Carl Tomlinson. Now, Carl is a man with a very unusual and particular skill set. Studied French and English at Oxford University. More recently, after a period running a manufacturing company and a period at Cooper's and Library, he went back to Oxford Brookes University and took a master's in coaching and mentoring. Now, I asked Carl who he would invite to his supper party, and Albert Camus and David Bowie were his two choices. So, Carl, what have you got to tell us on building trust and effective communication?
Okay, just to speak to those two choices, Albert Camus for his unwavering faith in the human spirit, and also I'd probably be able to bum a couple of Gaulois off him, which would be nice, and David Bowie for his persistent, restless, creative inventiveness. Turning to our agenda, I'm speaking this morning really from my experience of dealing with shareholder disputes and preventing those from turning viable businesses into smouldering wrecks, really. And there's two things that I've gleaned from doing that. The first is that if you're involved in that situation as an outsider, you have to remain independent and you have to be prepared to be unpopular at times. And the second is you have to notice and develop common ground as it emerges. So speaking to the first, in terms of remaining independent, often I'll be approached by one of the parties in the dispute or by an intermediary acting for them. And I always make the point of ensuring that I'm actually appointed, if I'm engaged at all, by the company, not by one of the two parties. So that establishes straight away that I'm working for the benefit of the company and not for one person's agenda. So if you find yourself in this situation, it's really important not to be the third point in a drama triangle, or a conduit for grievances and raking over the past. And to ensure that if the parties have something substantive to say, rather than simply vent, that they say that substantive thing to each other, and to stand away from being that communication channel between them. Often party A will say, oh, well, when you meet party B, you'll find out this or that about him or her. And party B will say, well, you know, party A will say this to you, and you have to think, and what works usually there is to be quite firm and say, well, you let me decide what I hear, please. You let me make up my mind about party B. And that can sometimes put people's backs up a little bit, because they want you to believe what they're telling you. So at some point in this process, you may find yourself being a bit disliked and a little bit unpopular. And when that is kind of in balance between the two parties, that can sometimes be the point where the common ground emerges. So turning to that common ground, it's important to remember that these people usually had a common idea, which was to run a business together. At some point in the past, they were able to cooperate and function together. So there are seeds of possibility there. And that common ground will often emerge from something, well, from nowhere really. And it can be quite a trivial point, which they both agree on. What's essential is to notice that common ground, really understand that you've seen it, hang on to it, work out how it came about, and do as much as possible to make it a little bit bigger and to keep the parties on it. And often, just thinking about some of the things Amanda said, it's really important to speak in terms of the parties' own frames of reference, to use their language, to use their ideas, to keep them on this piece of common ground, and to find ways to enlarge it. And I'll just close by sort of giving you the metaphor of a collie dog herding sheep. The flock's all over the field, and finally the dog and the shepherd have got them into a little pack. What the dog's then got to do is keep moving around, spotting where a sheep or two might break away, occasionally baring their teeth, but not actually biting, and gently, without spooking anybody, get those parties into the pen of resolution. So remain independent, prepare to be a little bit unpopular, notice and develop common ground. Thanks for listening.
Lovely, thank you, Carl. And I can just say that 5 weeks ago I had a really tricky shareholder dispute, and Carl employed those techniques brilliantly, which meant the company didn't go into administration. One party bought out the other, and I know it wouldn't have happened had Carl not been involved. So now, last but certainly by no means least, it's my pleasure to introduce Vee Bharakda to you all. Vee started her career in the world of accountancy and insolvency. She now runs a very successful consultancy with a focus on helping directors personally and through their companies when they're in financial difficulty. Vee's got an insolvency practitioner for a husband by the name of Frank, who's a very nice gentleman. Vee's shaking her head. Anyway, Vee, over to you.
It's not easy living with him either, trust me. You and Nikki have met him, you know. And we only just got married after 32 years last year, so I'm not sure how long that's going to last, you know, especially with the lockdown going on. Hi James, hi everyone.
Hi there. So your two golden nuggets, Vee.
Yes, so firstly, in my line of business, I deal with a lot of distressed businesses and have uncomfortable conversations with directors of companies and members of staff. I often get called in to assess the financial state of the company, to assess the merits of insolvency, whether the company is going to survive, or are we going to give it a decent burial, as we would say in our industry. The most common communication and trust issue is formed when the directors look at me and say, you know, I've got 15 staff, and how do I tell them that they're all going to be made redundant next week? So we put a process in place. So we coach the director and say, this is the legislation, this is how the process works. And quite often he will end up saying, I go to the pub with him on a Friday night. I went to his daughter's wedding. I'm godfather to their children. So all of those personal situations come in the way of dealing with what your responsibility as a successful director. So it's really important, really important to maintain the boundaries, without being bureaucratic, without being demonstrating that I'm the boss and you're the staff, do as I say kind of thing. It's really important to have that boundary to say, you are the owner of the business. There are some rules and regulations in place. We have a system that needs to be followed. In some cases, yes, it's okay to hit the road on a Friday night and go to the pub with your colleagues. But when it comes to sort of saying to them that, look, you haven't actually delivered the job spec that we've employed you to deliver, how do you then have that communication with them to say, well, these are the things that you need to improve on? So it's quite difficult. So maintain really strong, healthy boundaries. You're the employer, you're the boss. These people are the staff and the employees. And I've been working with my second nugget would be to carry out what we would call a boundary audit. So start with junior members of staff. People don't appreciate what the junior secretary, the receptionist, the underdogs, as people, those people are often known as underdogs. So, I would always start with those people and ask them what their key concerns are. How do they think that the boss is behaving? How are they affected? We can't forget that people spend 8-9 hours roughly 5 days a week at work. That's much more time than you spend at home. So it's really important. The key message is to create that audit of understanding people's personalities and putting them in not a hierarchy that's strict enough to make people feel like, oh, one person is sort of better than the other, but having a system that works, that makes everyone feel almost equal.
Thank you, Vee. Those were very useful perceptions, and of course you brought in the very personal dimension there, that when you've got a company in financial difficulties and people have got to think about making redundancies, it is deeply personal and very difficult and challenging for everybody. So now it's time to go to the breakout room. Now, before we do, our tradition is for me to remind myself and everyone of a wonderful TV series that I used to delight in watching as a young boy, The Golden Shot. Now, raise your hands if you remember Bob Monkhouse and The Golden Shot. I'm just having a look down. Richard Casbolt, Ash. So there's a few, Ian Woolard, jolly good. So there's a few people who remember it. So the way it worked was this, right at the end of the show, Bernie the Bolt was blindfolded, and the contestant had to guide Bernie the Bolt to move the crossbow and to fire the bolt in just 60 seconds. And as a young boy, one used to get very excited. And I fear at the moment we've got business owners going around in blindfold, working out when they're going to have to fire that shot. So, Nikki, over to you very shortly. Now, just to remind everyone what you've got to do when you go into the breakout rooms, and you'll be automatically allocated. First thing is, don't be shy. Talk to the other people in your room. You've got to come up with what you believe is the burning issue for your group in relation to the key issues of building trust and effective communication. At the end of that session, you then got to choose a spokesperson. That spokesperson will be the one who puts your burning issue to the group when we come back into the main session. So, Nikki, were there any other points we should make before you press the bolt? Roger Kimber as the first spokesperson to put his burning issue, and it is just one, Roger, just one burning issue.
Okay.
Off we go to the panel. And we'll start with Amanda, then Carl, then Vee. So your burning issue.
So our issue is, and I think everyone in the room agreed, is that whilst we're communicating more, number one, we're not necessarily communicating with the right people, especially if our customer base is not accessible right now, but we're actually not connecting anywhere near as much. Some of our staff are very introvert and love the fact that they can get on with their jobs, those who aren't furloughed, of course, whereas others are very more extrovert and are missing out on those on those 5-minute in the corridor chats, or the osmosis of just hearing what's going on in the office.
So your burning issue,
on those
Roger,
body language and those
you're
visual cues.
one of the extroverts, so your burning issue is what? The lack of...
How do we communicate effectively with that connectivity that a good majority of our staff are probably looking for?
Great question. Amanda, connectivity, how do you ensure you get it?
Well, exactly as you just said there, it's different for different people. So I would suggest actually never sort of assume one size will sort of fit all. And actually it takes more time and effort, but it's finding the ways that work for different people. So yes, for some it'll be a Zoom call like this. For others, it might be a traditional phone call.
Lovely. Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to keep the pace up, Amanda, if that's all right. So that's a great lead back to your comment of think about the audience. Carl, what about you?
I'll just echo what Amanda said. Maybe think about 1 or 2 little social events that you can run for the team as well. A Kahoot quiz, for example, or something like that, just to keep people connecting outside the business almost.
Lovely. Thank you, Carl. Vee?
Yeah, and agreeing on Carl and Amanda again, I think have a quiz along the lines of working out what maybe 2 burning issues like we're doing here for all your members of staff, the introverts and the extroverts, and then discuss them over a Zoom. A colleague of mine is having hangout parties, so they grab a beer on a Friday night and the whole team meets on Zoom, and they're all drinking a glass of beer and discussing their burning issues. So maybe something social like that would really, really work, and open communication.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vee. That's a lovely idea. Now, Rob Smith, who I can see is at Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco. Rob, what was the burning issue from your group?
Well, we didn't quite approach it like that, actually, James. We discussed broadly what was happening within the board, and also the board communicating with the staff as well. We did also make the comment that Vee, your husband's going to be exceedingly busy as a corporate, as an insolvency expert. A lot in the press about that.
Yeah, so your burning issue, Rob?
Our burning issue,
move
really
you along.
In one word, I'd say communication. And my summary of that was, this is the board to the employees: openness, honesty, share bad news as well as good news, and be realistic, not optimistic.
Lovely. Thank you, Rob. So the burning issue was just the importance of the board communicating effectively.
Yes.
So I don't know whether Amanda, Carl or Vee just had just one little comment to make on that.
All I'd say is that, some people worry about, well, communicating too much. And actually, especially in this kind of context, you can't really do that. It's all too often that we under-communicate. A great example, Boris Johnson in one of his early 10 Downing Street asked the journalists in the room, do you think we should still do this? Is this useful or not? So you think, well, so he wasn't sure it was useful. Of course, every journalist in the room said, absolutely, absolutely, because that was the only thing.
Yeah, lovely.
Keep communicating.
Thank you, Amanda. And Boris, we'll all have heard, has become a father today. So, Carl.
Yeah, I would say, just to echo some of the points I made last week, be honest about what you don't know and let your team know how you're going about trying to get the answers to the questions that you don't have answers to at the moment.
Lovely. Yep. Thank you, Carl. Vee?
Any idea about sacking the board, maybe?
Right.
If they're not communicating, if they're not adding value.
That's a good controversial one.
If they're not adding value to the board, then certainly if they're not adding those 3 key elements that you've said, maybe the board needs to be reviewed.
Lovely. Thank you, Vee, and thank you, Rob. So we're on to Steve Freer now. Steve, what was your burning issue from your group?
Well, from a selfish point of view, it's culture. Maintaining a really healthy culture, which we've built up over several years. But what came back was very helpful. Positivity were a focal point, which I'm pleased to say we do maintain positivity.
Right, so positivity and a positive culture. Amanda, Carl and Vee, just a couple of words from each of you on that comment.
Positive means it comes from different ways for different people. Some people want facts and figures, and that makes them feel positive when they can get to the raw data. Other people want, statements about we'll all get through. much more emotional kind of connection to feel positive. So again, it's what works for different people.
Lovely, thank you, Vee. Very interesting observation, Carl.
Yeah, what I would say just to that culture piece is, be very clear in your own mind about what the culture is. Think about how it manifests in normal times, and then try and translate that across into all the various mediums of communication that we've discussed to try and cover off as much of it as you can.
Lovely. Thank you, Carl. Vee?
And in my previous corporate firm that I worked for, we had posters, whiteboards all over the offices, sort of what our ethos and our values are. And we would ask the staff, a couple of comments on a monthly basis about how they're feeling about working for the firm. So those whiteboards are so easy to get from Amazon. So stick a couple of those, even a dozen of those around the office, and reinforce those values on the staff. This is what we're about, this is our culture.
Lovely. Thank you, Vee. That's brilliant. So that brings the formal discussion to an end. Could I invite everyone, please, to put themselves onto mute, turn off your videos.
James, may I just interject? We have a couple of points from the chat bar.
I think we're running very, very tight, Nikki. We've only got 5 minutes to go. So I think we'll have to avoid any chats, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. So everyone, if you would take your videos off, and let me come back to the screen share. So the Institute of Directors was founded by this gentleman, Sir John Lubbock. He founded the Institute in 1903. The Institute got its Royal Charter in 1906. Now, this was the second institute that Sir John had founded. The first one was in 1878 when he founded the Institute of Bankers. So this guy was a deep thinker. His next door neighbour when he was a young child was Charles Darwin. And when he was coming up with the idea for the Institute of Directors, he came up with this coat of arms, and it's got two lovely words in it: integrity and enterprise. And when I look back at my career as a lawyer over 35 years, I can see lots of enterprise, much less so, I have to say, integrity. And I think that's going to be the real challenge in this COVID-stricken world, is how we all really do embrace that question of integrity, because that's what's going to get us through these difficult times. Next, so I always need to inspire myself at this time of the morning. So we've talked about the golden nuggets, we've talked about the golden shot. Now these are the golden boys in Birmingham. Now I've told you all to take your videos off, so I can't say a show of hands who's heard of the golden boys, but they're famous in Birmingham folklore. So there are three men, and this is the secret of creating world-beating businesses. The three men: James Watt, a brilliant engineer, invented the condensing chamber to the steam engine. He walked down from Glasgow to Birmingham, where he met this man, Matthew Boulton. Matthew Boulton had created the world's first manufactory in the late 1700s, 500 people making fancy goods. He could immediately see the utility of the new improved steam engine. And they were only able to get it in the market because of the third man here, William Murdoch. He introduced that into the Cornish tin mines. So they built a wonderful company, this first steam engine company. The business was passed down to James Watt's son and Matthew Boulton's son. So a wonderful story there. Now, moving on. Sofie's thought for the week. So we're in difficult times. So, Nikki, what's the Sofie's thought for the week?
Well, this is a quote from The Tempest, and it's by Miranda, who's the daughter of Prospero. And it's, "Oh wonder, how many goodly creatures are there here, how beauteous mankind is, O brave new world that hath such people in't." So I think that we should all be looking forward to a brave new world, and we must remember how beauteous mankind is and make the most of the talents and skills that are out there.
Lovely. Thank you, Nikki. Those are lovely words. And Sofie's book of the week is The Speed of Trust. So we've talked about trust and effective communication. Trust, the One Thing That Changes Everything, by Stephen M. R. Covey. His father Another Stephen Covey wrote a very famous book, 21 Habits of a Successful Entrepreneur. I would really recommend this book to you. It is a brilliant read. So that is all from us today. So it just remains for me to say, be bold, and for Nikki to say,
be safe.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all for joining us. Please do tweet and do anything on your social media to let people know how much you've enjoyed this. Next week, please join us again at